Because sometimes when we're spiraling into the abyss, it's important to remember some of these fundamental principles that I'm going to talk about today in order to turn that abyss into bliss. This is the Dog Sitter's House podcast. Hello, dog lovers. Welcome back to the Dog Sitter's House podcast. I appreciate you being here. So today I am going to pull back the curtain, kind of like Wizard of Oz, on my business and share a pivotal moment that, at the time almost destroyed me, or at least it felt like it was going to. It was going to destroy my business, rather. And I'm going to walk you through how I was able to navigate it into the absolute best thing that could have ever happened. So what I'm going to reveal to you today are the things that they pretty much don't teach you in school, right? Everyone always wants to know what to do, what strategies, what methods, what software are you using in your business? What policies, all those details. And they think that that's what's going to make everything better. And yeah, you need to know that stuff, but that stuff isn't going to do you a lick of good if you don't have these inner principles that I'm going to discuss today. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when the poopy hits the fan, the only thing that is going to pull you through are these core practices. Okay, so for instance, let me ask you, have you ever been so worried about something like a relationship that you just end up making it worse? Or maybe you're like dating and you second guess every single text that you send your romantic interest, and you end up basically making yourself sound like a blubbering idiot. Yeah, that happens, right? Or you could be the complete opposite, whereas you didn't want to be rejected, so you acted like super cool and nonchalant, like, yeah, it's all good, I'm cool, like I'm not into you that much, even though on the inside you're head over heels and so excited about this person. But you were so nonchalant that they just didn't feel like you were reciprocating their feelings towards you. And maybe they moved on because they didn't think that you really liked them. You see, the lessons we learn in our personal world show up in our business world too. Because our business is like a relationship. We have to nurture it. We have to have healthy boundaries. We have to be emotionally intelligent. We have to make it fun. We have to show up consistently, follow through. We have to look at our patterns. We have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what am I doing to create my reality? What am I doing that is affecting this relationship? What am I doing that is affecting this business? And so on. All right, but first, I want to tell you why I think this topic deserves its own episode. You probably already realized that when the doggy poop does hit the fan, you can go into this kind of like massive panic mode really quick, from 0 to 60 in 2.2 seconds. So what do I mean? I mean, when your most frequent customer tells you they're moving, which means like an easy $400 a month decrease or something, or a pandemic hits and suddenly everyone is canceling their boarding reservations one after one. Maybe you don't have a team and like a full team, and the people that you do rely on, someone calls off sick for like the 10th time in the year and it's only March. I've been there. It's like panic mode when something isn't going as planned. You know what I mean? I'm sure you totally get that. So let me ask you, in those moments, think about a moment that you went into panic mode in 2.2 seconds. What were you thinking in that moment? Chances are you were thinking about pain, all the ways that this could cause and bring you pain. And I know this because our feelings precede our thoughts. And if we feel panicked, we're therefore thinking about all of the painful consequences that can happen because something isn't going as planned or as hoped or as expected. And when we're thinking about all of the bad that might happen, but mind you, has not even happened yet, it's literally impossible to think of solutions at the same time. Therefore, the longer we continue thinking about what we fear will happen, the more likely we are to turn our fears into our reality. So let me ask you, have you ever had a friend call up and they're in complete and utter emotional turmoil, freaking out about a problem that they were having, and they didn't know what they were going to do to solve it? But after you listened, you got all the details of their situation, you were like, oh, but of course, like, duh, just do XYZ. The solution was so obvious to you as to how to solve their problem. And it was so obvious to you probably because you weren't in the moment of the consequences falling onto your shoulders. And you might not have even been able to understand why your friend couldn't see the solution because it was so obvious. But unless you understand that when you get emotional, you're operating from your amygdala section of your brain. Now, I'm not going to get all sciencey on you here, but just to make sure you understand what I'm trying to say, I'm going to give you a little bit of what the amygdala does in the brain. So part of the amygdala's job is to identify threats, identify things that are going to prevent you from staying safe. And it also identifies triggers from the past, like trauma and things like that. It has it's not like your memory bank per se, but it does hold the memory of those traumatic moments that really stuck in your mind, like 9/11, like everyone knows where you were on 9/11, right? So things like that. And it's also responsible, therefore, for engaging your flight or fight response. But what does this have to do with running your own business, right? I would say it has everything. Because what you are not doing when you're focused on threats and you're triggering your fight or flight response is you're not focused on sensible solutions. You're not focused on resourcefulness, what you can resource to fix your problem. You're not focusing on the most logical, simple, and effective ways to solve your problem at hand. Because you just simply can't when your amygdala is hyper-focused on reacting to survive, on reacting to make sure you're bringing in enough money to pay the bills, when it's going into fight or flight mode. So I'm sure you understand that. And assuming that you do, I'll move on. But basically, your emotional friend cannot see the obvious, logical, and most effective solution because their brain is functioning from this amygdala area, whereas their problem does not trigger your amygdala. So you can easily see the solution to their problem. All right. So that's a super duper simplified summary of one of the jobs of the amygdala, but it is the most basic way that I can scientifically describe what's happening in your brain when you're faced with challenges within your business, your life, anything, right? So this is probably a good thing when you're faced with life-threatening situations that you need to fight or flight from. But when it comes to running a business, it can actually hinder your success. What do I mean? Well, what I have noticed is the mistake that the majority of people make is living their whole lives avoiding failure. Whereas successful people see how much they can fail. You see, instead of making decisions based on avoiding failure or even mistakes, successful business owners make decisions based on what they can try differently, knowing if it doesn't work, they're just going to end up learning something. Or, if they could get lucky and find a better solution to something in the end. Now, I get it. You might be saying, okay, great, April. Now, how does this apply to running my dog business? Okay, like I totally agree, but I don't see where you're taking this. So stay with me. It's a good question. And let's see if you can relate to the day that I'll never forget. And it was stuck in my amygdala because it was very traumatic. You see, I decided to go see a CPA and register my business as a legitimate business, since I never actually planned on creating a business out of dog sitting. And, I just started doing what I loved, and I never really planned on creating a business. So I did not have any kind of official, legitimate LLC or anything. So I had realized that I'd been overbooked for nearly a year. I had finished my taxes and realized I brought in over $70,000 in revenue. So I figured, hey, this is probably a smart time to go ahead and register as an LLC, make it official, and, make sure I got on my I's dot and my T's crossed, right? So I was super excited, super proud of myself, because here I'd actually created something with my own two hands and my own brain. And I left the corporate world and I created a thriving business that I couldn't even keep up with, mind you. So here I was like, I did it. I made it. I have arrived. Elvis is in the building, baby. So you can imagine how I felt. Oh my gosh. Just talking about it again, I can go straight there again emotionally. You can imagine how I felt when I walked out of the CPA's office an hour later, completely in shambles, because he basically told me that I couldn't afford to stay in business if I registered my company as an LLC. Like, what? How do you earn $70,000 in revenue and still not be able to afford to register your business as a business? I didn't fully understand it all, but I was so crushed. And here I'd worked so hard. I clawed my way into building this business, making sure that it was built on my values, my morals, my belief system when it comes to dogs. And this CPA had the gall to tell me it wasn't enough. Like, what is enough? If $70,000 a year isn't enough, I don't know what is, y'all. Come on. Right? So I get in my car. I made it to my car. And the second I shut that door, the tears just started falling. It was like a flood, a flood. It was a waterfall. And through the tears, I was texting my boyfriend at the time. And I was telling him, oh my gosh, I actually have to either close my business immediately because I'm bleeding money, or I'm going to have to raise my prices such an astronomical amount like yesterday. And those two options were not my ideal options, right? As I'm sure you can relate. So at this point, I mean, I drove home, cried the whole way. And I just felt so burned out. I had been working 14-hour days with literally no days off for a year straight. And I had absolutely no time to work on new pricing, much less the marketing I would need to do to pull it off, right? To actually raise my prices a significant amount and get people to buy into that. So I just couldn't imagine finding the energy to continue. And, honestly, I went to bed that night feeling like it was probably over. It was probably time to close up shop. I was defeated. I was exhausted. And now I was completely and utterly depressed. So I got some sleep as best as I could, as rough as it was. And, I kind of woke up. I remember, being in a bit of self-pity. I went through all the phases of grief, anger, self-pity, depression, you name it. And, luckily I had a very, very good routine where I wake up and no matter what, I meditate. As hard as it is when your mind is racing and you're stuck in fear. Fear for where my future was going. Fear for how I was going to sustain a roof over my head. But you know what? Something really, really cool happened during my meditation. I won't forget it. I remembered during my meditation, somehow, I don't know if it was a download or what, but it just came to me in such a prominent, it wasn't like a vision, it was just like a knowing, like a prominent knowing that we are all born as creators with infinite intelligence. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Duh. Don't forget that, April. So after that, I had this newfound determination. It was like a switch was just flipped in my brain. And instead of focusing on all of the woes and worries and everything that could go wrong and what am I going to do? Like there's nothing I can do. Like I'm stuck in a hard rock or a place between a rock and a hard place. That's how it goes, right? A rock and a hard place. And I really didn't feel like that there was any way out. But all of a sudden I started realizing yeah, I'm an infinite creator, y'all. Like we are powerful. I can figure this out. I wasn't sure how I was going to pull that rabbit out of my hat, but I had a new determination. And so I made a confirmed decision that day. Confirmed decision being the key word there. Okay. Because that is when the brain switches and says, oh, okay, I'm going to start looking for what's possible instead of looking at what's impossible. That day, I decided I was not going to give up, that this was all happening for me, and that I would find a way to significantly raise my prices and maintain a full roster of clients. And I was also cool with okay, but if I don't, I accept, I detach and accept the fact that I may lose people, but they're not my people. And I will find new people who are my people, who are willing to get a lot more value for their dog in exchange for a higher price. So I got to work, okay? And over the next few weeks, I worked night and day. During the day, I'm caring for a house full of dogs. And during the night, I'm working on pricing and marketing. And of course, I would catch myself getting caught up in fear again. A fear that gave me this immediate sinking pit in my stomach. I was afraid that all of my customers would leave me because of my new high prices, which catapulted me into a deeper fear, which was that I would have to find a job. After I purposely left the corporate world 2 years before that with the promise to myself that I would never, ever get a job again. So that was a very daunting thought and really triggered a deep, deep fear in me. But the messages, luckily, thank God, I had posted all of these messages around my house. I mean, it was anything from a little inspiring message from a tea bag that I put up on my kitchen cabinet to a magnet on the refrigerator, or cute little signs with sayings on it that you get from Hobby Lobby, or something I cut out of a magazine. Even my vision board that I had in my bedroom on my wall. And oddly enough, when I was having these fearful moments, I would almost inevitably always look up at that moment and see one of these messages that I had posted around me in the house. Or I would flip through my journal in the morning that I do after meditating, and I would see something I wrote in my journal in the past, or just like sayings, phrases, belief systems that I wanted to take on while listening to audiobooks or podcasts would just pop up in my head. And it was really, truly because of these messages that kept popping up for me at the right time that saved me from falling into the abyss of fear. And they pushed me to move forward with not only faith, but a knowing that it was all going to work out. There's a big difference. Like, faith is good. Faith is great. Believing is great. But knowing is living in that feeling before it actually happens. And that is where the magic begins. And it's because of this life-shattering dilemma that my daycare membership was born. Okay? This was the answer, the savior to not only my issues with being able to become an LLC and afford to do so, but it solved so many other issues along the way. All right. Not only did I solve the issue of charging way too little for the value that I brought people and hadn't realized it yet, and it also solved many more problems, such as like constant requests to reschedule, last minute cancellations, scheduling staff, then not having enough revenue to pay them. That's a tough one. That's always a stressful one. Having administrative tasks like keeping track of days used in each customer's daycare package. And I could go on and on, literally. You see, I had realized that I had been spending at least 1 to 2 hours, and that's probably conservative, but at least 1 to 2 hours nearly every single evening, responding to customers' cancellation, rescheduling requests, or sometimes I had to contact my team to change their schedule at the last minute to make sure I had enough people on staff, or I didn't have too many people on staff, which I hated doing. I hated that feeling. I didn't want to keep messing with my staff like that, because who wants to work for somebody who's constantly changing your schedule at the last minute, right? So this was literally the only time I had at nighttime, when all of these things, all these admin tasks that I was doing every single night, it was literally the only time I had when the dogs were completely passed out so hard that I could relax and recharge or spend some time with my boyfriend, And instead I spent it doing all of these administrative tasks, doing all the customer service stuff. It was just one of those cycles. It was like I couldn't get off the wheel. right? I couldn't get off the, what do you call it? I keep thinking gerbil because I had gerbils as a child, the gerbil wheel, whatever it's called. But once I determined the new pricing and I created the daycare membership model and developed a marketing plan to roll it all out, I was ready to go. I was ready to launch it. But this is when the fear in the pit of my stomach, or amygdala, however you want to look at it, grew the strongest. All right, because you're just getting ready to pull the trigger and you're like, is it gonna work? I don't know. Is everything gonna work out? It's like you have to take that leap of faith. You have to be the trapeze artist who has to let go of the trapeze in order to fly to the next one and catch it. And that fear, it tried everything in its power to talk me out of launching. It tried everything in its power to stop me from letting go of that trapeze and grabbing onto the next one, or whatever it's called, that bar. I don't know what the trapeze artists call those, the bars, right? It would say things like, in my head, right? It would say things to me like, everyone is going to be upset about a 58% increase in prices. Yeah, that's right. 58%. It was scary. And you're going to be left broke and unable to pay the mortgage, April. Like that was a real fear. Or it would say things like, nobody is going to like the membership model because they can get daycare and pay by the day everywhere else. Like, why would they do that when they don't have to do it anywhere else, right? Or people won't be able to see the value in my service. Therefore, they're not going to feel that the pricing is valid. And, my biggest one was, I'll never get any new customers because they're just going to see a number instead of the value. And I'm sure there was a lot more, but that's just off the top of my head. A few of the fears that I remember that would pop up, the little stories that my amygdala would tell me to try and talk me out of jumping, of letting go, of leaping, right? But it wasn't just my amygdala trying to talk me out of this decision either. And I'm sure you can relate to this because we all have friends and family who love us and they want to make sure we're going to be okay. So they'll voice their opinions and they're going to suggest things like, maybe you should do a lower price increase and just, I don't know, increase it a little bit each year. But I'm like, y'all don't understand. I can't afford that. Like the business is going under if I do that. So that's not an option, off the table, right? Or they would tell me, that creating a membership was too difficult because, trust me, it was a mind bender, right? My brain was hurting, right? But they would be like, that's crazy. I'd be like, there's too many moving parts, or what I like to say, moving paws. There's just too many moving paws and it's too difficult and it's not going to be possible. And, just give up, and they would just say all sorts of things, right? And, I get it. I'm not mad at them. They were just concerned about my well-being. So it wasn't easy to stay really steadfast and determined. Okay. This is where these are the moments that determine who you really are in life. It's these moments where you either decide to take that leap or you decide to turn around and go backward. And so this is where it all begins. Every single time you hit a dilemma like this is where it all begins. And just remember that, because when you get on the other side of dilemmas that you make it through, you always end up being grateful that you went through it, because somehow, some way, if you decide, they can always and always will end up making your life better in some way or another. Even if you're completely and utterly burned out emotionally, physically, mentally. I was on top of all this. I was financially stressed because I was obviously barely making ends meet, even with a $70,000 a year revenue. But what really, really pulled me through this dilemma, were two things that I can say I can contribute that were the most important things that I know that if you practice in your life regularly will help you overcome difficult challenges in your business much easier too. So that's why I wanted to share this with you today. So the number one thing, and I touched upon it earlier, is getting still each day. All right. Okay. If you can't sit down and meditate, which a lot of people think sit down and meditate means just quieting your mind. No, 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 no. It's not. It's getting present. It's becoming an observer of your thoughts. It's just being still. It can be prayer. It can be taking a mindfulness walk in nature. What's a mindfulness walk? It's getting rid of all distractions, not being on your phone, not listening to anything, and just being uber present to everything around you. You know what I used to love to do until I kind of not burned myself out on it. It's just, I just kind of ran out of things to look at. But in my neighborhood, we have this big, beautiful lake. And what I used to do to make sure I was mindful on my walks with my dog this was before I owned the dog business, was I would go around with my phone and take pictures. Okay. I wouldn't be listening to anything. I wouldn't listen to music, podcasts, nothing. I would just use my phone to take pictures. If I got a text, I would ignore it until after my walk, because the walk was my and my dog's time. And my goal was to look for things that I could photograph that were really beautiful, but that weren't very obvious to the average person walking by, right? So I would find little things that I normally wouldn't have stopped and appreciated, and I would appreciate it by looking at it through my camera. Of course, not just through my camera, but I would really stop and be present and appreciate it. Okay, so by getting present in the moment each day, this was a good way to recognize your thoughts, your fears, your lies that the amygdala tells you, because when you get still, you can hear those things, you can see those things. Whereas if you just don't get still and you don't get present on a regular basis, you don't train your brain to be as observant of these things and you miss them. But I was able to step out of my amygdala long enough each day and train it that way so that even through the dilemma, just like a friend on the outside of the dilemma can see the perfect solution, I was able to start to see my perfect solutions too. And anybody can do this. This is how you do it, right? Okay. Number 2. I also mentioned this earlier, but it is that I made a confirmed commitment, a confirmed decision to stay focused on what I could control. Instead of focusing on things that I couldn't control, like customers getting upset and leaving, I remained focused on how I could best show them the value of what they and their dog were receiving, that they had been receiving already for a year or more, right? And way underpaying for it. So that this way they too felt that the exchange of money for the service was fair, not only fair, but that they'd been getting a steep discount up until then, right? Because it's true. They really were. So I remained focused on how I could solve all of the problems of both my customers and myself, right? I didn't just focus on solving the customer's problems. Of course, I cannot sustain a business. You cannot sustain a business if you do not make sure that you're taking care of both yourself and your customers at the same time. I focused on how I could set up my membership and policies in a way that served all of us, as well as helped me get closer to my ideal lifestyle, which, I'm not embarrassed, but it's kind of sad to say that at the time, I was just hoping for a few hours to recharge every day. I mean, I was like, if I could just get a couple hours off each day, that would be great. That would be a fabulous solution. Like, that would help me move forward. Of course, I've since learned that wasn't enough either and have restructured even further to make that better. But the purpose of this episode is to say that by doing those two things, right? The getting still each and every single day and making a confirmed commitment to stay focused on what I could control and a confirmed decision that I was going to look at what was possible and create a new solution. By doing this, I accomplished what seemed like an impossible task to me and many others. Because after I launched my new membership and pricing, I literally maintained over 95% of my customers. And it's not all. I added a handful of new customers to the membership as well. It was mind-blowing. I was over the moon. It was amazing because this put me in the position to hire more help and register as an LLC the following year. And the rest is history, as they say. Of course, this wasn't the only dilemma I came across in my 6 years of business. But whenever I do encounter an issue, I always remember to apply these practices when navigating through it. Because I know that in the end, each dilemma is only here to serve me, to serve you, so that your business improves, your team improves, you improve, which always makes it worth it. Now, while there's more standard principles than these that I rely on when overcoming challenges, I can honestly say that these are the two most foundational principles that have probably served me the best. And when you apply these principles during challenging times, you're going to see, I promise you, you are going to see how much easier it is to overcome them because you won't be stuck focused on what you fear, which means you won't do what most people do and make decisions based on avoiding failure. In this dilemma example that I gave you today, this story of what I experienced and it having to do with pricing and significantly raising my pricing, I have to say that when you're stuck in fear, a lot of dog sitting businesses make this mistake when it comes to pricing because that's what they're doing. They're stuck in the fear. They usually determine their pricing based on what they think people will pay, which is basically always as little as possible, right? I mean, come on, who doesn't love a deal? And this is really the wrong approach. This is the approach of safety, of certainty. You're looking to fulfill your need of certainty that you're going to maintain the customers that you have, certainty that you're going to be able to obtain new business, right? When the truth is that your cost, your pricing is just an exchange for the value that you bring your customers. And this is where it's your job. This is your job to ensure that you effectively communicate that value so that your customers agree that it's worth what you say it is. Now, of course, you're always going to have some that won't agree with you. Okay, I get that. Totally agree. But we have to be okay with that. You have to understand going into business that you are not going to please everybody, right? You have to be okay because the value of something is subjective. So everyone has their own opinion on that. But you can do and play your part in trying to display that value in a way that makes sense to them, that they believe, and that makes them willing to open up their wallet and pay you. Right? But this is just another point that you can't make decisions based on fear. And or in this case based on rejection, the fear of rejection. Right? You're always going to have someone reject your services for one reason or another. It's going to happen. That's part of being in business. And if you don't, then that's just basically proof that you're a people pleaser. And how much does that affect you negatively if all you are is a people pleaser all the time? You know what I mean? You see, what successful, or what I like to call top dog CEO business owners focus on is making decisions based on solving problems or creating something new or creating a new solution in the world for a problem or a need that people have. Based on trying new solutions that they're willing to make, mistakes along the way to figure out. And this is why they get ahead. This is why they succeed. Because with each mistake that they make, they get better, they get wiser, they learn what didn't work, and they get closer to what does work, right? Which means that every single mistake that they make, every single time that they fall, they're closer to winning. So the next time that you find your business in a crisis situation, just take a day off as best as you can. Take a moment, take a walk, go through the emotions, feel the anger, feel the depression, feel the self-pity, and work on getting better and better at going through those emotions. It's super duper important that you go through them. You don't want to trap them in your body. You want to let them out. You want to release. But let me tell you what I have noticed with the successful people in the world, they get better and better at shortening the time frame it takes to process and go through and release those emotions, right? So the quicker you get at that, the better. That doesn't mean, oh, yep, I'm just going to lie to myself and say that I'm over it. It's all good. It doesn't bother me. And then ruminate on it for half a day. It doesn't mean that. Ruminate on it. Journal on it. Get all your thoughts and feelings out on paper. Take a walk, whatever you have to do, right? Scream and holler. Take a wiffle ball bat and beat your bed. I don't care. Just get it all out. Okay? Remember to get back on the saddle and get still. Be present. Slow down so that you can see the entire picture versus reacting out of fear. Then focus on what you can control, what you can do, what resources you have, and on finding a creative solution. Because the best solutions are the ones that come to a still mind who already knows they can come out better on the other side. And that, my furry loving friends, I know is a good point to stop. So until next time, happy tales and thanks for listening.